Hi, welcome to the third edition of Quarantine Studio Visit with the Schweinfurth Art Center. I am the program director, Davana, Robedee, and we are joined today by Ben Diller. Can you say hi, Ben?
Hello.
Ben is an artist who now lives in New Orleans, Louisiana. He got his MFA from the University of California, Davis, and then his BFA earlier at the Cleveland Institute of Art. And he does a lot of really cool, interesting projects. He collaborates a lot with his wife, Cynthia. They've done projects at Project Row House in Houston, had exhibits at the CAC in Houston and New Orleans, Bellevue Museum in Seattle. Been kind of all over the country, right, Ben?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, and he's been very generous to invite us into his studio today with the virtual studio visit. And I take it away, Ben. Tell us a little bit about what you got going on behind you.
Well, right now, thank you again for this opportunity, Davana, in the Art Center. What I have behind me are a number of different little maquettes I've been working on recently. I'm kind of taking a cool down from some larger projects, just working on going small this year so far. I often will start out with different templates, observational drawings. I'll respond to them through using abstraction. Sometimes it's more planar, sometimes more drawerly. I do a lot of work on my sketchbooks, such as building up from things such as this. That'll use templates, repetition, sometimes process, abstraction, and a lot of it is manifests itself from working on the house. And I have some images I'll talk about later. Through a lot of rebuilding, tearing down, and sense of restructuring through architecture, scrap woods. In fact, almost everything here is a drop piece from the house, has some kind of relationship to the structure. So that's important to me, that it has that memory and history that I sort of keep going within the work product.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that, because it's undeniable that your work has this architectural connection, and now to hear that you're using pieces from your actual house, how did you begin to connect those two in your practice with architecture and sculpture?
Well, it's interesting because my undergrad training is actually in painting, but I joke my wife, she is really the painter in the family. She studied with Wayne Thiebaud at UC Davis. So where I have the actual painting degree, I don't really paint. I assemble, I collage, I build. I have a lot of extensive background in the trades, working on carpentry, working in scenic shop. So I was always building and putting things together based on projects. Now I don't really see a separation between craft and projects. A lot of it also comes from my uncle, who worked on his house actually in the Catskills, upstate New York, years ago. And he would often leave things revealed and exposed. And so to kind of show that construction and that history, I never thought I'd wind up getting into it until we moved to New Orleans about 4 years ago. And this house has been a constant sculpture. It's been a constant pain. It's been fun, it's been a pleasure, but it's always, there's something you can work on it. And so in between these big projects, I would start working on these pieces, old doors, shutters, lattices, trellises. I said, hey, maybe I'll make art out of it, but I don't want to think about it art. I want to think of more of the craft, sense of engineering, repurposing. Sometimes a piece won't be as successful, but I'll keep it in the back burner. Other times I'll work through a series of different types of studies and manipulations. And I never know when something's finished because the house is never finished. So there's always something that will respond to something else within the process.
And the structures that you create, the final imagery, are they symbolic? Are they and sometimes I see recognizable objects in them. Sometimes they become abstract. What type of symbols do you use, and how you're working with it?
I think it just, that's a good point. You know, sometimes I never know. It's always about the attention to the framing edge. And I kind of use this in my teaching as well. Oftentimes we are guided by the rectangle. We work within the parameters of composition, whereas other times the wall is my composition. And so as I'm working either with shadow play fragments, I kind of let it inform me. Other times, say, such as a little truss layout here, I have a specific architectural reference in mind, whereas the more fragmented, open-ended ones, I don't have an idea in mind. So I just sort of, I like to occupy both areas, so to speak. And so I let the process sort of guide me with it. And the project I'll talk about later, the artifacts, was different because I had a specific type of parameter I was working with, and that was more of an encapsulated project. These are more kind of free form. So I don't really have a set plan where it goes.
So tell us about artifacts. What were you trying to accomplish with that piece?
Well, it's interesting because Jeff Mickey teaches sculpture at Southeastern. He sort of tapped me to do a piece about memory for the Marjorie Morrison biennial exhibition. Marjorie had just passed. She was over 100 years old, and so sort of the grand dame of Hammond. And so I had actually some other pieces in mind. I said, hey, Jeff, I'm gonna do these like box structures. Oh, that sounds great, Ben. I'll need an update in a little bit. I'm like, okay, Jeff. And then we started working on the house and said, Jeff, man, I'm slammed. Like, I'm working on the house. I'm not doing art these days. Like, just maybe something will happen in the process, maybe save some things. And I started reflecting my uncle on how he would save things from his house project in the upstate New York. And he would leave exposed corners and joints. I thought it was kind of silly. And then I remembered, I never had a photograph of those details. It was driving me mad. So I went back to my memory bank, started doing sketches, and I saved all the paint sticks from the projects to work on the house, and I started to combine them. And the central piece, the triangular shape that's framed, was the first part of the series. I don't know if I was going to do 10 of those, 2 of them, or that was it. And I would keep working on the house. One thing led to another, and it started to spawn all these other different ideas. And so it wasn't necessarily art with a capital A, it was just woodworking. It was just little remnants. I was thinking of Jeff, I was thinking of my uncle as I was working through these ideas of memory, trying to reposition that, and the piece just kind of grew from there. And like I said, I didn't plan it out, kind of organically happened, but I had some idea of some kind of framework, some kind of architecture that spoke about the house, but yet it wasn't so literal that it's like, okay, that's a door, that's a shutter, that's a window. I want to have another kind of layer of meaning to it. And then, like I said, the drawing, when it's finished, okay, now I have to plot out, take everything down, mark where the cleats and screws go. Now I'm going to do a drawing that looks like I planned it out when it wasn't planned. It sort of happened, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. A lot of what you're talking about in like your relationship with the house and how like how moving to New Orleans seems to have influenced your process reminds me a lot of like excavation, and it's almost like as you're building, you are removing and adding and discovering imagery within the materials. And you also talk a little bit about architecture in terms of New Orleans. It has one of the most mixed bags of architecture you'll ever see in the world.
Definitely.
Can you kind of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's interesting. A mixed bag is a real good way to put it. This house is kind of an anomaly. It's not exactly a shotgun. It's called a 19th century side hall cottage. The entranceway is asymmetrical. It's really unusual. A lot of wasted space in some ways, but that makes it really great because you come in this long hallway and then it kind of looks like a shotgun, but it's not quite exactly. And then they've had an addition in the back. So I'm definitely influenced by that. I want to make sure I give honor and homage to these structures I go. But again, I don't want to be so literal that you can say, oh, it looks exactly like it. So it's kind of like a blending of that. But yeah, I'm definitely influenced. I see these different cornices and spindles and turrets. I love all that stuff. It's like, I want to make it, but then I don't want to make it at the same time because, like I said, I just love it. It's really inspiring me, the engineering, the history, how it's been passed down, and how it's still preserved and it's still alive. And I think that's really important. And you can see a blending of styles in some houses where others it's more of a singular kind of style. So I kind of think of that in my own work that, I've always had this kind of challenge of how do I keep a style, but then open to other things happening as well within the project.
You do have this industrial aesthetic, but you do render occasionally really natural objects in your industrial aesthetic. I find that really interesting. I see like there's a lot of gears sometimes in your work that then will be, I almost feel that you even display them on the wall in ways that look more organic. Can you talk a little bit about how you have that push-pull between the natural and the man-made?
Yeah, and again, I think it depends on the project. Sometimes if I'm doing a comment about industry, about how we are right now with technology and progress, I'm going to have that. If it's a critique, I might have the gears kind of wonky and kind of floppy, or maybe it's not the perfect patina, but it's a sense of decay and entropy, moss, and growth that's kind of taken almost like a sludge or an ooze. I do try to bring in some kind of figurative element, or not, but something that's a little more representational here and there, just to trigger some association with the viewer. So it's not just, oh, it looks like a cool geometric design. I want something a little more. I want a little more of a bite to it.
Do you want to take a moment to kind of show us around your studio, if you can risk moving the camera a little?
Sure, yeah. So actually one image I didn't show you, and this is sort of a little drop piece, this fragment here. This is actually an old shutter with an old painting that was unresolved. I've been doing this recently, taking old pieces that weren't finished, combining them with fragments of current state. One's just a surface treatment. It's almost like a palette for another project. That was actually from a gear piece. And that's just an old shutter. So it's almost like a totem. It's totally not resolved, but it triggers, it gives you some ideas that lead me to other sense of discovery. Work on paper, again, unresolved. I think that I did that in a demo in advanced drawing class. It was just on the back of a drawing pad. And these are just some old paint sticks and some profiles from another piece that I sort of, basically just threw together. So again, it's not art, it's not finished, but it's something I'm kind of working on. Another one is sort of a gate form that I'm sort of working with, doing these kind of curves and arcs. Now I can't help but think about the virus flattening the curves. I've been kind of thinking about different illusions that are in the work, maybe subconsciously. You can see that sort of echo, almost vibration, and just some working drawings. This is just some old medallions from the house. So some are like really old, like 150 years old, old cypress pine wood I rejoined together. Others just fresher cypress that I saved from another project. So just kind of something in progress. I'm not sure what's going to happen with it. Might become a backdrop for a plant stand. It might become art. So that happens too. House projects sometimes don't stay art. Sometimes they stay as like a craft, house project. And I'm okay with that. Oh, and I have some working drawings as well, collages. Again, a transfer demo I did in class. Where's another one repurposed? Mostly graphite, sometimes tea, coffee, Conti crayons, so forth.
Is there anything else you want to talk about?
We sort of loosely dubbed this site our feature wall. It's actually a glorified walk-in closet, but on the front side, this feature wall is composed of 2 formerly unfinished or unresolved paintings. And I used a lot of old wood from the house. There's that old shutter on the other fragment that was in my studio. And so kind of it cordons off the area, but also creates a site for contemplation, reflection. You can ponder the craftsmanship, how remnants and repurposed woods have been reutilized. And so it's, for me at least, a literal marriage of art and craft. It's also framed out, looks like it's always been there. It's site specific, it's painting, it's a sculpture, and it's a wall, right? So it doesn't function other than a barrier, but it's also an opening for the house as you come into this 19th century side hall.
Wow, that's awesome. I love it.
And it's huge. It's almost 10 feet tall. It's about 6 feet by 10 feet. And it'll never be shown in a gallery. That's also the other beauty of it. So I was thinking of entering a show. I'm like, no, I don't want to take it apart and reassemble it. It's site specific, right?
What do you feel like is next?
That's a good question. I think right now, especially, we're so ever present with what's happening. I think I wasn't planning anything big right now. I was kind of, I'm really fortunate that I have a lot of small things left over from previous projects, a lot of remnants in the attic, leftover drawings that'll keep me busy for a while. But if I were to kind of look even further, I would love to do a larger installation composed of these smaller sections, totemic kind of wall pieces that kind of grow and evolve, based on smaller modular units, but composed into a greater, larger whole. Kind of like artifacts, but maybe 2 or 3 times the size. Think of Leonardo Drew, the contemporary sculptor, and how he would often do that by either going to a location such as Brazil or a factory, casting and assembling, and basically the pieces would just wrap all the way around the room. Or they'd be, hold up, my dog's bark, stop it. Or it'd be contained in a singular object that would also kind of talk about, history, the making, the unmaking, the sense of the patina of the object and so forth.
Are there any other artists that you're really inspired by that you're looking at right now?
Yeah, I always think of Martin Purrier. He's always in the back of my mind, but I try not to think of him too much more. Los Carpinteros, a collaborative group from Cuba, are really great because I love that. And I show them my students because they do both 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional art. They have a wordplay in both Spanish and English. So I really love their watercolors. They're kind of illustrative, but then others more abstract, very finely crafted. I had a list of Sarah Z I love. She's a little more abstracted. Anyhow, I have a whole list of lots of other artists, but those are kind of like the main ones that, I kind of think of.
I think this is wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your space and sharing your work.
Thank you,
and if you want to learn more about Ben, you can look up at his website, bendillerart.com. Well, it's so nice to talk to you today, Ben, and thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you, Davana.
All right.
We appreciate the opportunity.